What if we go in there and rather than getting into a pseudo shouting match, what if we just let the other side talk first? What if we just let them express their lens? What if we just kind of sit back and put our active listening hats on, our observational hats on, and leverage tools that we should already leverage as designers and researchers and see what these folks have to say? And we were able to understand that it's rolling downhill. They're getting hammered from the client. They come in, they're kind of cranky. We come in, we're anticipating the cranky, so we kind of meet the cranky energy. And just letting them connect with these folks as human beings and leveraging that empathy. And you can kind of say, okay, so how did this work? We were able to track via some artifacts. Meeting one, how did it work? We just let them talk. Oh, it kind of cut the tension a little bit, or it didn't do anything. Okay, so then we pivot and we try X, Y, Z. By leveraging those simple identified values and tactics where we thrive back into office dynamics, it really helps the environment rise to the occasion of where we find.
All right, listener, in this episode, we dive deep into the fascinating conversation with Justin Dauer, the founder of Anomaly by Design, a consultancy that aids companies in improving their design execution. Justin shares his journey from growing up in Chicago to building thriving design careers in-house and out-of-house in tech, product, and agency sectors. We touch upon his book, In Fulfillment, The Designer's Journey. I really enjoyed it so far, reading my advanced copy of the book, and I highly recommend it if you're looking for aligning your career with your values. His approach to transforming career trajectories with purpose, empathy, and fulfillment is pretty phenomenal. He has a great track record with the teams that he works on. Justin talks about the effects of the Swedish workplace culture on his ideas about pausing with intent and the importance of each person's unique fulfillment narrative on their work output and overall life. Without further ado, let's welcome Justin onto the show, and thanks for tuning in. Welcome to The Way of Product. I'm your host, 𝗀𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀, and this podcast is for product professionals who eventually want to run their own product org one day. The average tenure of a product leader is 2 years. 2 years because they fail to make an impact with their teams. I want to figure out how the best product teams and creative technologists tick, with the goal of putting it all into a book. And I want to document the progress and behind the scenes with you as I write it in the coming years. Do you want to get the book for free? Then jump over to 𝗱ощ𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀.com, subscribe to the newsletter, and I'll send you a draft of the book's introduction in a public Google Doc. So if you've benefited from the show in any way, if you enjoy your work more, you got unblocked from limiting belief, go to 𝗱ощ𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀.com, show some love, and join the newsletter crew. I appreciate it, and I promise to continue to make the show and newsletter more and more valuable as the years go on. Now, let's get back to the good stuff. Thanks for hanging out. Hey, listener. Today, my guest is Justin Dauer. He is the founder of Anomaly by Design. It is a consultancy that helps companies improve their design execution, and is also author of the new book, In Fulfillment, The Designer's Journey. Justin, welcome to the show.
Hey, Cade, great to be here.
Justin, can you briefly introduce yourself to the listener, let them know like your what, why, how you got to where you are, and we'll get the conversation started.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity to do so. So, whenever I go around the room in a meeting, I always have the most boring origin story. Born and raised and still live in Chicago, right in downtown Chicago, actually. Went to art school in a time when you would tell your mom or your dad that you're a web designer, and they would kind of scratch their head at what the heck are you talking about. But design and visual communication has been my trajectory ever since I discovered that was kind of my sweet spot, maybe midway through high school, in fact. So I haven't vacillated much from that course. It started with a traditional design visual communication background at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And then since then, it's been in-house, out-of-house, agency, studio, design, tech, product, and all those different kind of angles, I suppose, brought me to where I am today. But I think that core fascination of design as it is applied to what I like to call the digital landscape. That's really been my focus throughout my career. So before founding Anomaly by Design, which was coming up in in a month from, I was a VP of design within CVS Health. So I was VP of design for a company called 𝗱becque𝗴 that was acquired by Aetna, that was acquired by CVS Health. So double acquired. So advocating for design within a company of that scale and putting kind of concept to practice to execution in terms of cultural needs, in terms of advocating for team needs, in terms of product design at scale, all those wonderful things we kind of read about and hear other folks talk about, actually being able to execute on that over the day to day for about 5 years. And now here I am. I'm doing it on my own, working with other peers within the industry and bringing folks in as needed based on expertise, and really working in an environment that I feel like I can do my best work in. Dare I say, be fulfilled within.
Fulfilled. That's a perfect word. So I'm recently your book getting mailed to my house is very timely. I've gone through the first few chapters and I've really enjoyed it because it actually came at a time where I'm like, okay, what am I doing? What do I believe? What do I value? For me, it was like understanding like what I wanted to believe. So I did, along with a lot of other books. So I did bring your book with me to Spain, actually, the solo trip. And I just road tripped through the Iberian Peninsula and was kind of going through like Simon Sinek's books again, and then uh, going through the book that's literally on fulfillment from you. And yeah, it really helped me kind of understand like my values. A big exercise I did was actually write down everything that like were I consider my principles of what I believed. And for me, it's really locked I think the next 5 to 10 years of my career. It's given me a ton of focus and understanding what's important to me. Can you tell me stories of when the muses inspired you to write this book and that you thought was the right time to do it?
I had a section in my first book, Creative Culture, and it was a section of a chapter called The Transition of Fulfillment. And it was more or less, it was telling the story of, there was a manager on my team, and this manager was going from a transition of being fulfilled by their hands-on out towards the fulfillment of helping others achieve their goals. And it was walking through, guiding that person through that evolution, and then going back to when I recall I was first transitioning into having a team, having folks report up to me. And I was solely rewarded from that point, from the receipt of my own individual design, the feedback from the design, and the praise from the design, and how that helped me evolve in my career. And then as climbing the hierarchical ranks, I got further up in wireframe box charts and an org chart. It was less my output and more the output of others. And I would go home and I would feel like literally like depressed. What is going on? I feel like something core is not there for me anymore. And I had to make that mental shift from my output to the output of others. And some folks could probably evolve faster than I did. It took me a little bit. But once I made that transition, it felt like a natural fit. But where fulfillment lies, it sounds like a simple concept, but if you think of it, a jewel, there's all these facets to it that I think I use the word imperative a lot. I give a talk called Our Imperatives, Connection and Fulfillment. I think it is an imperative because fulfillment is bigger than us. Obviously, the evolution of ourselves and our work and being able to be best connected at work so we're best able to advocate for our teams is huge. But also, if are most connected to our work, then those who are engaging with what we create are also able to get the best out of us. So it's bigger than us, is the core theme. And when I first tested this mindset concept, if you will, when I gave the opening keynote at UXPA International in Baltimore a few years ago, I guess at this point, and I gave that talk that I said, Our Imperatives, Connection, Fulfillment. The feedback I got is when I first started talking, this is an audience member telling me this, and I started talking about fulfillment, that was like a very kind of self-serving topic. But as I got into it and I was able to peel back the layers of the onion over 45 minutes, I'm able to better articulate how, when we understand what our values are, we can assert our values within our environment, and best connect to a place where we can create and best advocate for our work and best advocate for people and product evolution. So there are all these little facets within the jewel of greater fulfillment that align to us being our best version of ourselves and what we're creating, making meaningful work, and really evolving in a healthy, positive direction rather than stagnating and kind of sleepwalking in the day to day.
Could you walk me through what those facets are and how you broke them down?
Yeah, you mentioned you got through the first few chapters of the book, which is great. And I think what the foundation there, I mentioned the word values already. We kind of hear that used a bit in terms of the job hunt, in terms of, just what are businesses or an organization's values? What are their ethics? I think it all starts with our values, first and foremost, as one of the facets of fulfillment. When we are able to not only understand what our values are, but prioritize them within our personal and professional spheres of existence, and then be able to understand like what do we absolutely need versus what can we kind of function without or within a diminished capacity wherever we create or in what we create or why we're creating. So having that sense of values, I think, is absolutely huge. And as we dig in further, being humble throughout the course of our career, I think the third chapter. It's funny, I don't know the chapters in my own book. I think the third chapter is ability an essential value. And I think if you're a designer, if you're a dentist, if you're a lawyer, if you're a construction worker, always being a student of X, your craft, what you do is putting you in a position to help you evolve, to help you connect. I say in the book, design is connection made manifest, and I genuinely believe in that more than it just being something that would go in a bumper sticker. Because if design is product, if design is an icon, if design is a chair or a community center, it's about solving the problem of connecting with people wherever they're at, agnostic of circumstance. So I think being able to do that is another huge facet of fulfillment. Being able to grow, being open and able to grow, functioning in an objective over subjective way. This is kind of a muddy answer, but because there's quite a few facets on that jewel, if you will, and we certainly get into the book, and we can get into it more today. But those are some of the things that pop to the mind straight away.
𝗺cie𝘃𝗃𝗀, hilariously a running joke that he's probably one of the most quoted thought leaders on my show. One of the first guests, he was guest number 6. I've done over 100 episodes, and one of the things that he realized, which I think is very similar, and I always like to ping it when I hear 2 guests or 3 guests say the same thing, it's probably true. And his version of what you just said was that design is facilitation. And as a designer, your job isn't to just give a recommendation. Your job is to assume that you have information that you don't have. So you have to go track it down, bring people together, make sure that everyone feels seen, heard, understood, and then come to the best answer, not give an answer as a designer. And that's from now, as of this recording, the global head of design for QuickBooks. So just like whole world. So I would take it pretty seriously. So I think it's like I think you guys are onto something, that if design, and I really like what you said about how if design's the artifact, if it's the deliverable, then we'll never actually make things that people resonate with.
Yeah, I very much agree. I come back to a soundbite that one of my before I focused on design, I took some illustration classes, and my illustration teacher, again, this is back in high school, she said your pencil should always be searching for the line. I would tighten things up too quick, and I would get locked in. And she said, you think, it's at that point of malleability, the creative process should be rough. Ideas should be rough. And your pencil should always be searching for the answer. And I think in a literal sense, that's accurate. And I think in a metaphorical sense, as we think about our creativity and our design, I always also think that that's very accurate. And that's, I'll come back again to being students of our craft and leveraging humility all the time, because we have podcasts. I'm a guest on your show, which I appreciate. There's book output. I have a lovely portfolio. I am by no means the master of anything or the authority on anything. I certainly have thoughts and opinions based on my expertise, but I am not the expert. I think there's a clear delineation there between expertise and expert. So always a student of my craft, always open and available to evolve. And I really come back to your pencil should always be searching. I think that's such a beautiful little nugget that I'm glad I got to trot out today.
Yeah, absolutely. And that reminds me of I'm actually going through Stephen King's memoir called On Writing. And for Stephen King, who's a prolific writer, creates a ton, well, wrote like over 30 fic- like best-selling novels, not just like making 30 novels and then like getting a successful hit, like consistently. I think most of his books have been adapted into film. And he talked about how, oh, the story, he's like, I hate plot. Like he's like, a good writer should never plot. Like you should never just make up the story before you write. And he called stories fossils that he would uncover as he wrote. And so he just established this practice of just getting up every day, writing 10 pages, like a few thousand words. And he says that he's just observing the story, like the premise of the story, and then he's writing what he sees as he's doing it. And I'm like, oh, well, that's literally like design, because you're like it's I wouldn't call it a fossil. It's probably a living fossil for a lot of the problems we're solving in our careers. But it's just saying, as a designer, I'm just telling you what I see. I'm just observing human behavior. Observing the behavior of the customer of CVS Pharmacy. I sat in there, observed, I saw other frustrations, and therefore we should change this script in the service design, or we should change this wayfinding to address what I saw. And so like design, if executed well, shows that you were listening first and foremost, and you were observing before you recommended.
Yeah, the Stephen King or the story there is really interesting because you think of the way a lot of authors write, like if they know they're going to write three or four, they're writing a series and they know there's going to be 3 to 6 books, what have you, and they plot everything out. What they plant some seeds in book 1 of what's going to happen in book 6, and based on what you said, King more or less wakes up and sees where the story takes him, which I think is fascinating and to some people likely terrifying. And I certainly find comfort in a list. A list is just a comforting, tangibly or metaphorically. It's kind of comforting to have you have to do ticked off. But um, one thing I've always found the most exciting thing in the world is the blank canvas. I think the blank canvas is the most exciting thing in the world because of the sheer possibility. When you sit down or you're looking at a whiteboard or blank canvas metaphorically, it's a bunch of people in a room and they're going to ideate something just like that when you're on the precipice of those synapses firing and things and you like where's your hand going to take you if you're just quickly sketching something or if you have all this lovely and informative and brilliant research that you're going to start designing against designing for toward in tandem with just before the lead touches the paper or your hand moves the mouse. I think that's the most exciting thing in the world. And I want to pause there for a second when I say hand. I was asked in another dialogue recently are my favorite design tools, and I said pencil and paper. And I wasn't trying to sound faux profound, but I genuinely believe going back to your pencil is always searching for the answer. I genuinely believe at the point of ideation or conceptualization or sketch phase, we could even say, that is still like your go-to tool. You broadly, that should be your go-to tool. Quickly iterating, quickly adjusting, how hard the pressure on the pencil intimating hierarchy. There are so many beautiful things you can do or rapidly create or craft or use that eraser to morph and evolve. So many wonderful tie-ins there, literally and metaphorically. So just a quick plug for the pencil industry, if you will. I still say that's your
Yeah,
go-to tool
yeah. This podcast is sponsored by the number 2 pencil.
by
Uh,
Ticonderoga Pencil Factory.
yeah. Well, I mean, a quick digression, and I can always edit this out if it sounds stupid. But there is like a pencil factory in Germany, and I just saw this piece that they pay their workers livable wages, and they just make pencils. And in a world
Love
of
it.
like every company just needs to be a tech company and stuff, it's like, oh no, what if we just solve a real problem? And there is a demand for the pencil. I just recently found out I had ADHD, which totally explains like my what at the time seemed like really dumb purchase. I got the Remarkable 2 tablet, and uh, I believe in paper so much, I just didn't like the inconvenience of having to space organize physical notebooks. I'd rather just use an expensive digital one, but I've been using it for years now, and it's always where I start. If I'm like just writing stream of consciousness, like what I think about the problem to help me like get clarity on what I don't know so I can move forward. Just putting things down on paper is super valuable. And so I think I want to double click, which I think a lot of my friends that listen to the podcast they hate that statement. I want to double click on like what about the blank canvas from like a values perspective, just you as an individual, is so exciting because that excitement, that dopamine rush, comes from something that you value. Have you been able to articulate that?
Well, to that specific example, yeah, I can answer that for sure. One of my values for certain is being challenged, and sometimes it feels good to we mention a list or tick things off a list or just get something done quickly. But other times, like putting together I don't know, 5,000 piece puzzle or the ultimate relationship test or putting together a piece of IKEA furniture with a partner, like something that is challenging for certain, that I thrive from challenge. So not having the answers straight away. And again, even if we're talking, I have wonderful research to inform my design, which I've been fortunate enough to have throughout my career. But not having the design answer straight away and knowing I'm going to change, knowing I'm going to make mistakes, knowing things are going to iterate and evolve. That is incredibly, you mentioned that serotonin or that dopamine hit, incredibly appealing to me and energizing to me. I'll use the word energizing. It really charges me up. I like crumpling up paper and I like starting over and I like, having lead cake. This is all my lens certainly, but valuability. I'm gonna make mistakes. I know I'm going to assert my experience. I'm going to assert my form design based on research, but I'm not going to get it right. And it's going to be a challenge to get this right. And I have to think about the myriad of viewports people are using, and I have to think of a myriad of other business constraints and product constraints and a million other things which designers have to navigate daily. That is all incredibly appealing to me. Navigating all those factors, not having the answers, being challenged, learning something new, growth and evolution are huge values for me. So as are able to sit down and look at any specific instance, I just went through sketching, for example, and I was able to, this is from a tool I talk about in the book called Make Meaningful Work, a platform. And there's a tool called practice spotting. And I was just able to look at in the 30 seconds there, the core 30-second story of sketching and getting it wrong and evolving and knowing I'm going to make mistakes. I can kind of dig down into that 30 seconds and extract these points of where I thrive, and get a better window into what my values are, which I think is it's kind of a handy thing.
So practice spotting, could you in a few sentences unpackage like the value of that practice and why you, I'm assuming you're the one that created that framework. Like you
I
tell me
didn't
the
create.
story of, or I guess like where do you get the inspiration for that and why did it resonate with you enough to end up in your book?
Yeah, certainly. The creators of Practice Spotting are Joe Wong and Dan Zook. They are the co-founders of UX Hong Kong, and they have their own consultancy called 𝗱liche. And they are primarily researchers, and I think Joe is on the design side. And they've been putting this framework together over the course of, I don't know, 10, 20 years at this point. And I think it's just rolling out now in the nascent stages of it. And it is all about, they say practice spotting is a sense-making tool at its core. And effectively, like I said, it's all based on storytelling, our own personal narrative, developing our own personal narratives to dig down into what drives us in a given story, where we thrive, being able to identify those points of value, and then make them exposed for other people to benefit from and leverage within a cultural setting or their individual environment. So if I being challenged, my own values being challenged or evolving growth centric mindset are some of my the practices where I thrive, and I can kind of communicate that to my manager. If I am a manager and I know that's where my employees thrive, then I'm able to leverage that. I'm able to their benefit, to the culture's benefit, the team, the output, the organization. And it directly aligns to fulfillment, which is the most beautiful thing selfishly for for me, based on where my mind is these days as well. And all those values, all those points of connection, all those points of where I'm charged from, the great thing there is that they are portable and they can align to our personal sphere of existence. They can align to our professional. If I want to get out of design and I want to be a farmer, or I want to be a carpenter, I'm able to take those values and kind of bring them wherever I go and see where I'm best fulfilled and how I can evolve. So it's really a beautiful tool, and coming from researchers and design thinking, design focused caliber people of their caliber over that long, the way it works, if you're a designer or a researcher, it just makes great sense. It really hits kind of the high notes of how we like to operate and the way we think. So highly recommended for my part.
So practice spotting, it sounds like an empathy practice, right? And I've been thinking about this a lot, that the problem with most corporate American jobs is the expectation to be professional, which I do think is an important virtue in a professional setting, where if you're trading money for your services or your time, you should be able to not burden people with everything about you and have them expend more emotional energy. But at the same time, um, part of the job, and Seth Godin talks about this, is expending the emotional energy in your work and actually engaging with other people and other individuals and recognizing them as humans. And so we the problem with corporate America, my current thesis, is that we define ourselves by what we do, not by who we are, and who we know. We're not human doings, we're human beings, and recognizing the narrative of that person's life and recognizing what they think their narrative is to the outside world. Because if you can work with that narrative and they feel like you understand their narrative, they're going to be loyal in the sense of like the market, like a rabid fan base for Tesla is the reason I think Tesla is so successful, or like Apple's so successful, is they align their story to the story of their customers.
Mm.
And the practice spot, and I mean, in the sense of practice spotting, if you want to use like the Apple example, it's because they're a big example in building your story brand, which is a great book for designers that want to understand marketing, or anybody that wants to understand marketing, is the fact that uh, they align their story of, hey, you could get any computer, you can get a PC, but if you use a Mac, it's because you like to make things, you like to break the status quo, and it's like, oh, that's my story, right? And I think like understanding what you think your story is an artifact, or I guess the fossil, if I use a Stephen King example, that like the story's already there. You just have to uncover it, observe it, document it in the form of highlighting what you value. It's like, oh, like why is this story my and yeah, that's just this is my hyper obsession, is just to make connecting dots between books, because I'm going to quote another one. So uh, if you listen this far, sorry, I'll finish. I'll tie the loop. But in Find Your Why, which is written by Simon Sinek's team, they actually do a workshop to help you find your why. And basically, it's a facilitator asking you to talk about your formative years, because their thesis is that your why comes from your teenage. Like it's the years that you are kind of establishing an identity, and I would say maybe goes into your early 20s as well. And then they basically just listen to you tell your story, and then it's like, oh, how did you feel when that happened, or whatever. And that story that you tell is basically everything that informs who you are as a person and what you value. And so for me, like when I went through that exercise, I found out, okay, I like making people feel seen, heard, and understood, because when I do that, people tend to be more communicative, more vocal, more collaborative, because they have that like psychological safety to be able to just be themselves around me. And it served me very well in my career. But yeah, I'm just not convinced that being a professional and acting corporate is actually helping businesses. Like, I do think being a professional means like not overburdening people with like your problems, but there is like a certain um level of management that needs to happen with people on the team to make sure that they are being allocated towards the activities that really like fit who they are as a person, what their story is.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate everything you just cited there. And, there's that concept of being your authentic self in the office, and that certainly has some baggage, but being able to operate the same way in our personal and professional spheres of existence, leveraging our same values, being able to be our authentic selves, that's a non trivial thing. And it's certainly incumbent upon those who are in control of decision making within the business. I'm not going to say leadership, because a leader can be someone on their first day of the job, but those who are in control of decision making in their various levels of hierarchy to make sure that is how the culture exists. But back to the point of practice spotting. Say, like, if someone told a story of on the way into work, someone asked me for directions, and I stopped and gave them. And you can kind of dig into, why did you stop and give them directions? Well, I've been lost in the past, so I know how that feels. You can immediately extract empathy from that. And then the kind of one of the beautiful parts of the Make Meaningful Work platform that I cited is that not only can you identify a value from that and leverage that and grow from that, but then we could also leverage that back into a work environment and make it a measurable, trackable thing. And I think that's where the magic kind of comes into play. So if I know empathy is kind of a key value of my team or the individuals, there's an example I think I gave in the book, or maybe it's one of my talks, but I in one of the teams I managed, a design team, they would go into this status meeting with the account side of the business. And it was a very politically fraught dynamic where the respective teams would come in. The energy was adversarial, headbutting based dynamic, and there'd be, going into the meeting, there'd be anxiety and lack of productivity in the meeting. Wouldn't be the best example of productivity. And then coming after the fact, you kind of come out of a meeting, you're like, oh God, that sucked. And like people are kind of coming down from that. So you think about the wave of lack of productivity just by itself was intense, and it kind of tails off and people level out. And if we leverage empathy, what if we go in there and, rather than getting into a pseudo shouting match, what if we just let the other side talk first? What if we just let them express their lens? What if we just kind of sit back and put our active listening hats on, our observational hats on, and leverage tools that we should already leverage as designers and researchers, and see what these folks have to say? And we were able to understand that it's rolling downhill. They're getting hammered from the client. They come in, they're kind of cranky. We come in, we're anticipating the cranky, so we kind of meet the cranky energy. And just letting them connect with these folks as human beings and leveraging that empathy. And you can kind of say, okay, so how did this work? We were able to track via some artifacts. Meeting one, how did it work? We just let them talk. Oh, it kind of cut the tension a little bit, or it didn't do anything. Okay, so then we pivot and we try X, Y, Z. By leveraging those simple identified values and tactics where we thrive back into office dynamics, it really helps the environment rise to the occasion of where we find out we're fulfilled. And I feel like if we're fulfilled by our work, or we're fulfilled by our coworkers, but the culture is kind of not doing it, then we're not. Then there's still that disconnection, and disconnection drives sleepwalking, which drives lower quality of work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there are all these kind of puzzle pieces and beautiful dominoes that kind of fit together.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break from our scheduled programming. If you're enjoying this podcast and you've gotten any value out of it so far, I have a special request for you. I'm currently writing a book on product team collaboration, and I want to get the message out there. So if you want to take a moment and hit subscribe in your podcast app, that would mean the world to me, and it would be super helpful in booking better guests, getting better content out there, and getting the message of this book out to more people. So whether you have to pause this podcast or you like multitasking while listening to it, just take a moment and hit subscribe on the show page and show your support. Again, thanks for listening. Now back to the show.
So I want to ask the listener um, I guess it's a rhetorical question, even if it is a real question, because you can't answer it. You're listening to this in the future. That because I think we've all been in that situation where there's these adversarial relationships with other departments. What are you trying to accomplish by pushing your agenda in those meetings? And I think the reason I say that is I was in a very 100% exact similar scenario in the last couple months. We did this huge overhaul at my work on how we even fulfill a service. And that meant we were going after all these operational groups, commercial groups, spreadsheets that they're using to fulfill our services, all the systems and SOPs that we were going after all of it. And there were a lot of meetings like that where the product manager would just go in there and be like, no, this is what we're doing. And then it just turned into the meeting was gone. It was like, once that moment happened and they're pushing that agenda, the meeting was gone. And so, like, if it's not working, well, what are you trying to accomplish by just trying to resolve the problem in that meeting? And then also, I think the incentive structures between people that work in R&D and product and design and engineering is totally different than a finance person or a salesperson. Like, how they get paid and compensated is completely different from us. Like, we have the space to breathe and think and have meetings and talk about stuff and talk about processes. Salespeople and commercial people, they do that too. Finance people do that. They talk about SOPs, but like in their free time, like 40 hours of their week is still focused on making sure that the financial forecasts are good, that the books are kept, or that we're actually expecting. And us just going into a meeting and telling them like, oh, we're going to change everything. This is how we're going to do it. Just makes them feel unheard and threatened. And then also they don't trust you yet that you understand their problems. But magically, in other scenarios where I'd be like facilitating the meeting, getting them talking about their frustrations, telling them a story where this went wrong. Another great book, which is like Chasing Confidence, which is by 𝗺𝗺creative. He talks about the method of, I think, active discovery, where it's basically you're just getting the narratives, you're practice spotting, right? And you're making them feel heard. And then you just repeat, hey, to understand, like, is this why it's a problem? And then you're using like emotional language to like kind of aggravate it a little bit to verify that they did it. And then it's like, okay, cool. Thanks for meeting with me. And then you come back with a concept of, hey, I was thinking about what you just said. What if we did something like this? And it could be like a sketch or a prototype or something like that. And they're like, oh, wow, this person gets it. I'm going to give them more of my attention and collaborate and work with them because they're making an effort to understand our perspective.
I really appreciate how you wrap that up. It's very easy to apply a lens of judgment or immediately cast off. It's, oh, they're X. Oh, it's Y. But you are exerting energy to go the extra length and try to understand what this person is dealing with. Leverage empathy to kind of go deeper than the surface level. And some people never get to that point. Oh, okay, yeah, okay, that meeting sucked, and that person sucks. Okay, next meeting, and then they never get beyond that, and then that politically fraught environment is always there. And then on Sunday night when you're about to go into work, you're like, oh God, I do not want to go back into the office, and you're not sleeping, and then you go into work, and work sucks again because you're never going deeper. You're never exerting that little bit extra energy. I don't want to trivialize it. It's not a little bit. It's extra energy to kind of go deeper and understand what's going on with this person or this environment or XYZ. But I'll tell you what, doing that is certainly better than sleepwalking, going through the motions, ticking the boxes. Then you're not evolving. The environment is not evolving. Your portfolio is not evolving. The product is not evolving. The business is not evolving. You can see where I'm going. So, I think some of it is incumbent upon forces that are at play outside of our reach, but some of it is also certainly incumbent upon us as well to kind of go deeper and as much as we can impact and affect change within our immediate environment. If not just for the environment ourselves, for us. A good part of the book is about for looking out for number one, certainly, which we should absolutely be doing. So yeah, I appreciate your wrap up there because it is. It is effort exerted. You know, we have deliverables to do, and we have stuff at home to take care of, et cetera, et cetera. But the payoff, dare I say, is well worth it.
In Tony Fadell's book, he actually established this practice of where he would spend his weekends. So when you're a VP of such a large business unit as like the iPhone division, basically like its own like world economy or a country, like the GDP of a country.
Yeah, truly.
He would write down in the meetings. He'd just listen and he'd write down everything that he heard and observed, and then on the weekend he would transcribe those notes into text, and then he would review that, and then he basically had like this note, like this text, like this transcript of his notes that he'd carry around. And then he would like just make a little annotation, follow up on this, or like, hey, a couple weeks ago you mentioned this, like how's that going, and stuff like that. So I think I want to transition the topic here. I think there's so many ways, and one of those ways is just reading your book to help you as an individual look out for yourself. I think how as a leader do you kind of foster that environment where you give them the space to become more fulfilled, like your teammates, the people that you lead. And when I say like lead, I don't just mean direct reports. Like I personally don't. I kind of avoid management, and maybe my mind will change later in my career. But like people, you as soon as someone wants to follow you, your idea, you become a leader, right? And I like what you said. Like a leader can be someone that comes in the first day, and people follow them because they resonate with the people that follow them, right? So I guess as a leader, and in your experience, I'm going to touch back to your comment at the beginning of this episode where you talked about how you had to like rediscover yourself after you left IC work. What were like some of the things you had to learn or unlearn? Maybe what's like a good like anecdote that kind of helped, that was like a formative experience for you? I'll leave it at that and just keep it open.
Yeah, so I'll do what one of my bosses used to say: bottom line on top, and then I'll get into the story. Bottom line on top: slow down, pause with intent. So I'll put a period on that, and then I'll tell a little story. When I was director of design at this Swedish agency, and I was first getting accustomed to Swedish culture that they brought into the office and the workplace, and I remember in the middle of the day around 2 o'clock, everyone just stopped working. They got out of their chairs, went to the center table, and their respective partners came in through the front door and brought in baked goods and coffee. No one worked, and they just were talking. And I felt psychologically shackled to my chair as an American worker. I was like, what the hell is going on? No one's working. The phone is ringing. No one's getting up to answer it. And they had to like physically beckon me over, come over here, sit with us. And they just were talking, man. They were just connecting and laughing. And then they went back to work. And that's called fika in Swedish culture. And I talk a whole hell of a lot about it in my respective books and my talks. And the beautiful thing of fika is about slowing down, and it is about connection. And when I visited, I've been to Sweden a lot because of that position. Their mothership was in Stockholm. And you walk down the street in the middle of the day, and it's younger people having a piece of cake or having coffee, or employees just not being in the office, and it's just this beautiful, beautiful act of cultural connection that is significant. And for me, it was life changing and certainly work changing as well. So I like to call it pausing with intent. It's not to slow down and play video games or something like that, which is fine. But there's a difference between a distraction and an outlet. I'm not trying to distract. I'm trying to have an outlet for connection or to recalibrate. I always say fresh eyes is still one of the most powerful tools in design. Just putting it down, closing your laptop, going for a walk, looking at it in the morning. So I think that is huge. And you asked, how can I, as a leader or a manager, help my team with that? And one of the foundational, this one simple trick, uh, is slowing down, pausing with intent, and ensuring my team has the bandwidth to know they can do that. Like when I've been a leader before, and at that Swedish agency, when I hired a team, I was tasked with building out a team and growing the North American creative practice. And I was hiring other American workers, and I was trying to impart those Swedish values onto them. And I had to physically say, tomorrow you're working from a cafe, or tomorrow from 1 to 2 you're going out, and you can go out solo, you can take some coworkers, and you're not working. And I want you to process your environment and, be inspired by the world around you and the people you see, because it's not all about Googling top design trends 2023. A lot of our inspiration can come from the most unexpected places. So just making those subtle and not so subtle calibrations within how people think about creativity, how they think about their work, and how they think of what work has to be or can be, dare I say. So, now that a lot of folks are working remotely or hybrid or fully in the office, making sure everyone has the space to do to be able to pause and slow down, or support asynchronous working or check-ins or communication, or have these common points of coffee dialogues, or understand how somebody might be inspired week over week. All that comes from that act of pausing with intent and slowing down and going into it with a mindset of, what do I want these outcomes to be? I think a lot of rituals fail because we just throw crap at the wall and then it doesn't stick. I put a happy hour on a video happy hour on people's calendars at 5 o'clock, and no one was showed up. I don't understand why. Well, people want to go home. They don't want to work after 5 o'clock. They don't want to give work more time. So understanding what the outcomes are from this respective ritual or pausing with intent and what we hope to happen, I think helps frame it in a positive sense, and helps us track if it's successful or not.
I'm a big fiction fan. I like the Jack Carr books. There's actually a Terminal List, it's actually really good. A TV show that just came out. They just made a TV show about it. But the whole premise is that, well, Jack was a Navy SEAL. He lives in actually Park City. I'm noticing you have a Moab shirt on, so I'm wondering if that's a place that. Where are you calling from, by the way?
Chicago.
Chicago. So yeah, I'm actually calling from Utah. So I'm like, okay, this guy's well researched. He must know him from Utah because he put on his Moab shirt.
Yes, that's exactly what I did.
Yeah, really, man, your PR team's great. They're good. The anyways, yeah, he writes. He's really good. He's really prolific. Writes this book, but it's usually how I am able to just mentally decompress, slow down a little bit. But there is a really great quote that comes from the SEAL teams, which is "Slow is smooth, smooth is fast." And it's funny. I didn't think, since I wasn't listening to some nonfiction book about design, I was very surprised that that quote actually has influenced how I operate as a professional, where I just refuse to move fast for the sake of moving fast. Like, speed isn't a virtue. And I think velocity is a virtue for sure, but speed isn't a virtue. It's methodical, establishing a practice and sticking to that practice no matter how stressful it gets. Go slow so that you could be smooth and precise. And then, ironically, you tend to go faster. Because when you go fast, there ends up being, if you just go fast for the sake of being fast, there tends to be just a lot of waste. Like, you're not getting 100% out of people. They're not feeling great. They're feeling burnt out. And then something that could have taken a week of just good, smooth operating takes 2 months of just circular meetings.
Yeah, you got it. That was very well articulated. I used to watch The Simpsons quite a bit, and I think there's an episode where they're all zipping around in go-karts, and Marge is crawling, and she's slow and steady wins the race, and they're zipping around. And that was 20 years ago, and that stuck in my head. But it's that simple nugget. I've heard salespeople say slow down to speed up, or I say pause with intent, or you just gave your military. I think there's a copious variations on a theme there, but at the end of the day,
Must mean it's
it
a
is.
true principle.
Yeah, there must be something to it. And
Yeah.
it's one of those things that I genuinely do believe in.
And so understanding that, and I really appreciate you sharing that story about Swedish culture, because I am kind of a huge, just look at me. I'm a big Norse country fan for a lot obvious reasons. Even had a trip canceled because of COVID there, but it was, yeah, under just seeing this culture where I wouldn't say they prioritize work-life balance. I think they just prioritize living, and they saw work as a vehicle to play a part in just living their life. There's a complete reframe of how they look at it. I don't think it's because I think people are oh, Europeans, they value work-life balance. So I'm I don't think they're looking for balance. I just think that the purpose of life is to live it. And we have this new concept of fiat currency that you get through helping an organization meet their goals. And I don't have any equity in that company. So I don't have any part in the upside. So they get me for this amount of time, and then I go to my cabin in Bergen
Yep.
or whatever.
So one of the
Oh,
things, yeah, I have to go back to the Moab shirt. So one of the things that I did at
oh,
the Swedish agency was something called X Camp. where I would take people from various disciplines, and then I would take them somewhere in the country or the world, and we would just connect in a purposely low tech area. So one such camp was in Moab, Utah, at the Arches National Park, where I had gone with my wife on a solo trip, and then I knew I wanted to take the team there as well. So we went to the 𝗺Ranch near Moab National Park. For just a week, we connected and we crafted and we created agnostic of our laptops. And I had people sketching ideas in the red dirt down there and using sticks and typing, and we put sticky notes on the wall. But it also wasn't about that. We cooked together, we cleaned together, we had fun together. I remember somebody on the first day saying, I cannot effing believe I'm getting paid to do this. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, this is a reframing. Work doesn't always have to be about working till, it's not about, hashtag agency life, working till 10 o'clock at night. You're not just a name and a piece of paper. You're not an Excel cell on a spreadsheet. I think that is a demonstrative action over words caliber action to show that versus painting something on a cafeteria wall. So anyway, I just had to come back to that. And I think it again speaks to valuing people and valuing a diverse and unique thought and actions over words.
Yeah, here's like a thought exercise. 1 hour meeting with all 50 of the stakeholders that you need to get buy-in. And ironically, if you try to do it in 1 hour, you end up taking multiple weeks to do damage control from how bad that meeting went. Or you do 20 hours of one-on-one meetings where you just listen, and you do that across a couple weeks, maybe the same amount of time you do damage control, except it's less emotionally charged and people actually feel better about it. Which one would have the more positive outcome, right? No, I actually, for the first example, because I am basing this off a true story, no, it was 2 months of damage control. It wasn't the same amount of time, but if you just did take 2 weeks to just understand where everyone's going from, help them understand where they are in their mental model, like the project. And then also I think Atlassian did studies, Airbnb as well, where they measured, and they're one of the few like big tech companies in Silicon Valley that are still doing remote work. And they're just like, no, we just bring everyone together for the purpose of just connecting every quarter. And we measure the engagement scores, and it's the same as this. It's better than full remote, and it's better than everyone coming into the office every day. Because the purpose of seeing each other in person is the connection. It's not like working next to each other in the same desk. Because I would argue with the very limited commuting experience I had, COVID happened a year out of college, so I am a little bit of damaged goods when it comes to this argument. But um, like getting together to work together actually isn't the benefit. It's the lunch meetings you have in between the working sessions to get together. And so like, why don't you just optimize for that, where you're just doing activities, you're creating opportunities to have conversation, get to know each other, and then you could do the work remotely. It's been proven you could do it remotely just fine. So yeah, I want to respect your time, Justin. And I feel like we've maybe just scratched the surface of your book, but is there anything that you feel like needs to be said that's been left unsaid in this conversation before we sign off? And also, I want to give you an opportunity to like share how people could contact you, or any calls to action that you have, because I want to make your investment as valuable as possible. Spending an hour here, so what do you feel like has been unsaid?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I want to come back to one of the first things you said in this dialogue. You said you read a bit of my book, and it kind of struck you at a point in your career where you felt like it was a good fit for that. You kind of wondering where your fulfillment lies. And I'll say this: I've had dialogues with folks who are more in their dotage, like I am, and I've had conversations with folks who are mid-career, and I'm not. This is not just an anecdote. I've talked to people who have just come out of college as well, and some of the talks I've given, and people have approached me. And what I will say is, what am I doing, or am I fulfilled in what I'm doing, is a commonality amongst those. And I thought it just might be a little more advanced in their career, but I think given what we've all navigated the past few years, you mentioned how you kind of came out in the midst of COVID. and the moral injury and the burnout and the fatigue and are we working remotely? Are we working in person? Does my organization value me? All these folks testing the market right now. The market is continues to be sour and I'm not just saying this to pat the book on the back, but I think understanding where your fulfillment lies, where you can make your most meaningful, impactful work for your benefit and for the benefit of those who engage with what you create. Now's the time to do that. Now's the time to not be sleepwalking. Now is the time to understand what your values are, how you can prioritize them, how you can align them to your work and your environment, or craft an environment that best suits you, where you can best do your most effective work. There's no time like the present, long story short. So if my book is the tool to do that, that's super duper. If you find another means of finding folks that where you can work with and ideate with and bounce things off of, and that's the place where you need to be, that's awesome too. If you need to make a career shift, that's awesome too. But just slow down and pause with intent and understand where your fulfillment lies. I think that's an absolutely timeless notion, and particularly now it's of immense value. So to your other questions, where can you find more about the book? And I appreciate everyone listening, and I appreciate you having me on the show. In-fulfillment.com is where you can learn a bit more about the book, pick up a copy via a venue you see fit. And if you'd like to reach out to me, I always prefer these are more a dialogue rather than a monologue. Anomaly with an Anomali by design.com is where you can learn a little bit more about me or reach out. And I'm happy to connect with folks as well. So thanks for letting me put that out there, Caden.
Well, Justin, thank you so much for coming on the show. And just want to acknowledge that I'm definitely one of the people impacted by your book. I think a lot of the ramping up of this podcast had to do with, in a small part, just the first few chapters of your book. So just want to acknowledge that. I know that writing books is a lot of hard work, but I think it's been a good investment of your time. You have a good one.
Thanks. You as well.
Hey listener, thanks again for listening to The Way of Product. As we power down today's session on the fusion of creativity and technology, let's solidify the energy you've gotten from our dialogue today. If you've gleaned insights or strategies that could turbocharge your projects, I have a small but powerful ask. Swing by the platform where you're hearing this and leave a review. Think of it as your digital high five to us. It's a fuel that propels this content to more creative technologists like you, amplifying the impact of the shared knowledge. So until our next interview, keep pioneering and pushing the envelope. Thanks again for lending your ears and your imagination to our community. Catch you on the next download. Is everyone gone yet? Because this next offer is for you. And this is because you listened all the way to the end of this episode. Today's episode is sponsored by 𝗱actually, a name you might not be familiar with yet, but one you'll definitely want to remember. I don't know about you, but most meetings are terrible. Long circular discussions, weeks with no progress. I was tired of that. Tired of good energy getting sucked out of potentially explosive creative sessions. So I finally decided to do something about it. That's why I started 𝗱actually. Think of 𝗱actually as a special ops for team collaboration. We're the ones you call for remote or on-site workshops where you need to get your product team aligned and moving without the usual drag. No more endless circles or feeling like you're herding cats. I've been there. I've been stuck in the muck of misalignment, watching the clock while creativity just fizzles out. That's not how breakthroughs happen. 𝗱actually workshops are built differently. They are the cure to the common meeting. And because I believe in the power of what we're doing, I'm offering something special to Way of Product listeners. If your team's feeling stuck, let's talk. I'm opening my calendar for free 25-minute coaching calls to audit your team's collaboration issues. We'll dissect the problem areas, and I'll share techniques and tactics tailored to your situation to help you get unblocked and back in the flow. Think of it as a turbo boost for your team's productivity. So here's what you do. Visit wayofproduct.com/workshops. Get all the details, sign up for your free coaching call, and let's start turning those meeting groans into high fives. All right. Thanks for listening to the full episode. And remember, with 𝗱actually, it's not just a meeting, it's a turning point. Talk to you soon.